Justin Trudeau came to power in 2015 with a majority government riding high as a young, charismatic, popular, progressive leader. He had the support of an overwhelming amount of young voters in Canada as he pranced around the country extolling the virtues of gender diversity, immigration, and marijuana legalization. Now, close to 10 years later, that support is gone. Young voters in this country now consider themselves to be conservatives, gearing up to give Pierre Poilievre a majority government of his own. But what happened to Justin Trudeau's youth base? And why are young voters in this country not willing to put their support behind Jagmeet Singh instead of Pierre Poilievre? Joining us now on the Faulkner Show is Dr. Michael Bonner, a Canadian communications and public policy expert, as well as the author of the 2023 book In Defense of Civilization. Last week in the City Journal, you published this piece about Canada's new young conservatives, in which you explained the phenomenon of young voters abandoning the Liberal Party and the Socialists and embracing Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives. So to start us off, can you explain what is behind this new sudden shift in Canadian politics?
Of course, Harrison. Thanks for having me on your show. I think in Canada right now, nothing is more tired and stale than Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party, and it's no surprise to me that that the constituency that brought him to power originally have moved along. He isn't talking their language. It's just sort of one identity political nostrum after another, and sort of various sort of niche preoccupations that don't really speak to the needs of millennials and Generation Z and so forth. And as I say, I'm not surprised that that portion of the electorate have left him. And of course, it isn't only them, but they are by far the least likely coalition that you might think would have moved along.
You mentioned that one of the reasons for this is that the Liberals have injected identity politics and the claims of racism into every element of political life and really of Canadian life, looking specifically at the military and of our history. So it seems that, in your opinion, the cultural policies and the use of specific words that the Liberal government have adopted, specifically Justin Trudeau, that's played a significant role in their downfall.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think it's kind of a substitute for actually doing something. I mean, it's that kind of hypocrisy. We when I was younger, we didn't really have a name for it. Now we call it virtue signaling. It's virtue signaling on steroids. It's become extremely annoying, and as I say, it doesn't do anything. I mean, we are not a country that has no particular problems or in which nothing important happens. We have a great deal of challenges, not the least of which is housing, the sort of uncontrolled or barely controlled mass immigration that the Liberals now favor, inflation, you name it. We've got a lot of different problems, and talking about these sort of obscure niche issues or what have you. I mean, they just don't do anything to address them, and there's only so long the public can put up with that for. Now, I don't know what it is that prevents the Liberals from taking any kind of action. That's really sort of up to them, but talking endlessly about these things is no solution to anything. And I'm sick of it. I suspect you are, and I think that many of the people who probably gave Justin Trudeau a great deal of goodwill back in 2015. I think that they're disappointed.
And Canada's not alone in this, right? I mean, we've seen this in the UK, we see it in the United States and across Europe. Young people are moving towards the right. They are moving in the direction and showing support to charismatic conservative leaders, populist leaders. So do you think that Justin Trudeau is also almost a victim of this global trend as well? Because we know that the global left-wing politicians and the powers that be, they look at Justin Trudeau as a figurehead of their movement. They see him as someone that represents that sort of globalist open borders ideology. And this seems to be a global shift. So what do you think is behind that? That this is not just in Canada, but it's happening seemingly all over the Western world.
Well, first of all, I do think that there is something to the trend that you mentioned. Yes, there's something different in Canada, though, and all Canadian politics is always going to have a populist element to it. Every party has a populist wing, or people talk about prairie populism as being the origin of both the NDP and the Conservative Party. What's distinct, though, is I think that Pierre Poilievre is a far more substantial leader than you might think by international standards. He talks the language that youth need to hear. He's squarely focused on the problem of housing, on inflation, on the budgetary deficits that Trudeau promised would be gone by now. That sort of thing. And he makes them he makes them clearly relevant when he talks. And that's I think abroad that's often a sort of missing element. So in addition to the sort of general malaise or upset or discontent that people might be feeling against a government that's been in power for so long, there are real solutions that seem to be on offer. And Pierre is also a young man. He's 43, if I'm not mistaken. Trudeau is 50. 50 is not exactly old necessarily. He's not exactly geriatric, but he's older. He's no longer the young phenomenon that he seemed 10 years ago when he was, when he was much more popular both here and abroad. So, some of I was going to say a lot of that sheen has come off. He's tired. The government seems kind of paralyzed. It doesn't make, it's sort of incapable of acting decisively. And as the problems of the post-COVID world close in on us, and arguably even, something of a winding down of globalization and so forth, people are looking elsewhere. People are looking for, something new and real solutions.
Just to almost play devil's advocate in a way, we know that Pierre Poilievre isn't exactly jumping off the charts when it comes to likability. There was recently a National Post Leger poll that basically put Trudeau and Poilievre on the same likability level. I believe the question was, I have it here, it was about which National Party leader would they least like to sit next to on a long flight. Poilievre and Trudeau managed to come out evenly on that. And the same was, I think there was another question like that. And we've seen governments switch before and go from liberal to conservative and conservative back to liberal. And many people just say that this is part of the Canadian system, which is Canadians vote governments out and not necessarily vote them in. Do you think that there's something to that this is just Trudeau past his due-by date and Poilievre has come along at the right time rather than Aaron O'Toole or Andrew Scheer, who tried to jump the gun a little bit?
Well, yes. I mean, I think that there is a certain amount of truth to that the popularity of the next government is inversely proportional to how much the previous one was hated. But look, you made a very important point about leaders. Not every leader obviously has the same qualities. You generally get some mixture of just sort of agreeableness or likability or whatever you want to call it, and something more like empathy, and then something more like cerebral qualities. A guy like Pierre Trudeau, the Prime Minister's father, he was a very cerebral guy. He struck people as you wouldn't want to get into an argument with him, but not particularly empathetic or nice. Reagan Ronald Reagan, highly agreeable, jovial, friendly, that sort of thing, but not necessarily a very, not really a brainiac. Thatcher, sort of more on the intellectual side also. I think that Pierre has more of that intellectual tendency to him. I know him somewhat. I've worked with him in Ottawa back in the day. I found him agreeable, but certainly he has that sort of intellectual quality. He likes a good verbal sparring match, and he likes an intellectual problem. I don't get the impression, looking at the current prime minister, that he enjoys intellectual problems, or that he is particularly, um, motivated by verbal sparring matches or arguing about things or whatever. But he does. A lot of people thought that he had some kind of charisma, or he was dynamic or something. Maybe some people think he's empathetic. I don't particularly see that myself. But there are different qualities that appeal to different kinds of people, and I think that the kind of world that we are in now, or that we are entering, calls for more of the type of person who's going to take a problem, take the bull by the horns and wrestle the problem to the ground, and examine it from every angle, and come up with some kind of solution, not someone who's going to say fine words.
Right. And I think Stephen Harper is someone that falls into that category of someone who's not very charismatic, but people looked at him as a competent leader, and he struck them as one. How much do you think immigration plays a role in the sudden change we're seeing? It feels, just from my perspective, as a young person talking to other younger Canadians, immigration is the topic that everybody's talking about. Everybody's paying attention to it. Pierre Poilievre isn't the strongest on this issue. It's not something that he is, really grabbing by the horns. But the Trudeau government seemed to be backtracking heavily now on immigration. Do you think that the sudden shift in Canadian public opinion is part of this shift towards Pierre Poilievre's conservatives on immigration in particular?
Undoubtedly. I mean, as I've written in previous pieces, the Canadian pro-immigration consensus was in place for a long time. We never had, there were always people who thought that there were extremes. There were some people who thought that immigration should be so high that eventually we should have 100 million Canadians before the end of the 20th century. There was even a book in the 70s about that. That was kind of weird and extreme, but there were people who thought that. And then there were people on the other side who thought there should be no immigration. And the exact opposite extreme, but not a very popular idea. Most people were right down the middle. Most people were happy for a long time with a moderately high level of immigration that kept the population up, and that selected for people who knew English or French, people who were young, and people who were people who had a job offer. There was sort of an economic emphasis on it, and that kept the consensus strong. The Liberals have completely destroyed that. Now, I don't want to speculate on what they thought they were doing, or why they thought this was good. Some people have said, that it was just a cynical electoral ploy, or maybe they genuinely believed that that this was bound to produce some sort of great economic benefits for everyone. Whatever it was, it hasn't worked out. And we don't have the infrastructure, or even the we don't have the public infrastructure or the housing to accommodate the huge influx of people, and very little thought seems to have gone into that. I don't think that Canadians are xenophobic. I don't think that Canadians are naturally disposed to disliking other people. I think that this is a very different kind of phenomenon from what has taken place in many European countries, or arguably in the United States. But the consensus is gone. People want to see lower numbers. And the Liberals know that there must be polling that they have that reflects this very clearly. And so the numbers are coming down. However, I think, I don't have much insight into what goes on around the Liberal cabinet table, but the way they're going about it is completely boneheaded, if you ask me. I mean, things if you ask me, things like international students or whatever, that's low hanging fruit for them. That's very easy to chop off and reduce the numbers. But it's terrible. If anything, bringing in highly educated people who have been chosen by highly competitive universities, because our universities are outstanding. The universities have chosen these people. They have agreed to pay, higher fees than domestic students do, and the colleges and the universities are plugged into our industries. They're plugged into the local labor market. This is, if there's one element of the economic immigration file that's bound to to actually have some kind of beneficial effect for it, it's that, and that's the first thing the Liberals cut. I think that's a huge mistake. The sort of thing that needs to go is the non-economic stuff. The endless family reunifications and chain migration and all the rest of it. We're kind of getting into a different subject here,
Right.
but this is a mess. It's a mess that they made. They're cleaning it up or trying to clean it up, I think, in a completely sort of ham-fisted way. And even if Canadians don't know about this or they're not plugged into the details, they know that something is wrong, and they can feel it. They're not buying what the Liberals are selling, and anyone, I think that they're very clearly looking for an alternative, and many people will look back on the far more moderate and sensible policies of the Harper era, and obviously associate that with the present day Conservative Party, and that's where they will, that's where the focus of their political interest will be.
Right. And you mentioned, and I think all Canadians can agree, we look at the polls, we see this. If an election were held today, Pierre Poilievre would be the prime minister the following day, and the Conservatives would be voted in quite clearly with a lot of the support from young Canadian voters. But that can easily go away. What do you think? What do you think Pierre Poilievre would need to do for him to lose all of this young support, all these young supporters? Or do you think that this is a long-term trend that young people are going to stick with the Tories? It doesn't strike me as potentially the way it's going to happen. But what do you think would have to happen for that to be the case?
That's a good question. I mean, what it reminds me of, to be frank, is like I don't know how many times in my life I've heard this sort of truism about how young people are naturally left wing, and that they get more conservative as they age. Okay, first of all, that's I don't think that that's necessarily true. But even if it were, even if it were, you're faced with this population that gets older, and then, according to the adage, people get more conservative. So, millennials are getting older. I'm from 1982. I still remember the Cold War, and I now have a family. I've got friends who have growing families, or they're starting their families. You naturally start to think about life a little bit differently when that sort of thing happens. I don't expect that to change. If anything, I expect our electoral politics to get a little bit, maybe a little bit more conservative as we move along. But the fortunes of the present day Conservative Party depend on them and the leader continuing to focus on the issues that actually matter, and proposing workable solutions, and staying laser focused on those issues, fighting, and I say this in the piece, fighting the culture war and winning the culture war. I'm all in favor of that. Okay. But as we can see, the Trudeau Liberals are by far their own worst enemy in this regard. We don't need to, there's very little that we can do to make them look even stupider than they, or more useless than they already are. We've got to be there, ready with, talking the language that the electorate want to hear, laser focused on the issues that matter, with serious demeanors, looking like we're ready for government. We mean business, and if Pierre and company can stick to that, they will maintain their lead. I'm quite certain of it.
Incredible. And just where can Canadians find you on social media, and where can they see or read some of your work?
Well, I'm on Twitter at Dr. Michael Bonner. That's just Dr. Michaelbonner. You can find my book In Defense of Civilization in fine bookshops everywhere. You can even order it on Amazon if you must. And watch for me in the Hub. And in the Dorchester Review, if you subscribe. And if you don't subscribe, you should.
Absolutely. Dr. Michael Bonner, thank you so much for your time and for speaking to us on the show today.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.